We argue constantly today about politics, about justice, about rights, about identity, about truth. The arguments are intense, they are emotional, they are moral, and yet they rarely resolve. We don't lack passion, we lack agreement about what counts as a reason. I'm about a third of the way through After Virtue, and I already understand why this book still matters. It doesn't feel dated. It feels diagnostic. It feels like somehow finally explaining why modern moral debate feels heated, but hollow. MacIntyre's central image is powerful. He asks us to imagine a world in which science has collapsed. The institutions are gone, the theories are forgotten, but fragments remain, bits of vocabulary, disconnected formulas, partial texts. People still use the language of science, but the framework that once gave that language coherence is gone. That, he argues, is where we are morally. We still say justice, rights, freedom, equality, autonomy, but we no longer share a tradition that explains how those concepts fit together. And because of that, moral debate becomes strangely theatrical. This is where his critique of emotivism hit me. Emotivism, in his account, is not just a theory people consciously adopt. It's how moral language actually functions today. When we say something is wrong, what we are often doing is expressing preference, signaling disapproval, attempting persuasion, applying psychological pressure. We are not appealing to a shared moral structure. We are asserting, and that reductionism annoys me, because it feels like an oversimplification of something much deeper. It treats moral judgment as preference dressed up in language, but conscience does not feel like preference. Dignity does not feel like preference. The truth does not feel like preference. MacIntyre exposed something here that I already sensed but hadn't articulated clearly. Modern moral discourse often lacks shared criteria. We argue intensely, but we do not share the same standards of justification, and so we talk past one another. Now here's where things become interesting for me personally. I've spent a lot of time reading Hayek and Popper. I still agree with Popper politically. I still believe in institutional humility. I still believe concentrated power is dangerous. But After Virtue speaks to something deeper than institutional design. Modern liberal societies protect freedom, and that protection matters. Freedom from coercion, freedom of speech, freedom of association. A society without these protections becomes oppressive. But here's the tension. Modern liberal institutions are neutral about the good. They protect space. They do not define purpose. And that means they cannot generate virtue. They can prevent tyranny. They cannot form character. This is where I found myself articulating something like this. A society without freedom becomes oppressive, but a society with only procedural freedom becomes hollow. Freedom as non-interference, what I've been calling A, is necessary, but it is not sufficient. If freedom is not ordered towards flourishing, towards some conception of the human good, it drifts. And when it drifts, moral discourse becomes managerial. Problems are no longer moral, they become technical. Experts mediate, bureaucracies administer. Debate becomes performance, and virtue, as a lived practice, fades into abstraction. So far, much of MacIntyre's diagnosis feels obviously true to me, not because it's simplistic, but because it explains something I've observed. Moral education cannot be neutral. You cannot teach "be good" without some account of what the good is. You cannot cultivate virtue without reference to ends. And you cannot form character without tradition. That word, tradition, still feels abstract to me at this point in the book. He's mainly discussing Aristotelian and scholastic frameworks. And here's something interesting. Popper criticizes scholasticism sharply. MacIntyre is rehabilitating aspects of that tradition. On the surface they seem opposed, and yet I find myself agreeing deeply with both, in different domains. Popper when it comes to political humility, MacIntyre when it comes to moral formation. That tension doesn't bother me. It actually feels clarifying. Because political safeguards and moral anthropology are not the same project. One protects space, the other defines purpose. And if MacIntyre is right, modern liberal societies protect space, but no longer know what it is for. The challenge comes here. If virtue requires a concrete moral tradition, which one? Can pluralistic societies sustain thick moral communities? Or does neutrality inevitably thin everything out over time? And here's where my own tension surfaces. I instinctively feel that the modern liberal order is transitional. It doesn't feel stable. I hope it transitions toward moral deepening. I fear it transitions toward power consolidation. And what determines that outcome? Not theory. Character. If moral education weakens, consolidation becomes easier. If formation strengthens, deepening becomes possible. In a sense, there's something to what John Adams said when he said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." MacIntyre's project, at least so far, is not nostalgia. It's reconstruction. He's not merely saying things were better. He's saying we have lost the narrative unity of a life ordered toward a telos. And without that narrative unity, moral claims fragment. That feels right to me, but the practical implications remain open. At this point, about a third into the book, here's where I stand. Freedom as non-interference is necessary, but freedom must be ordered toward flourishing. Dignity is real. Truth is not created by consensus. Moral comparison is possible, and moral education is foundational. Institutions protect. Formation creates. If liberal societies cannot generate virtue, they must at least allow space for communities that can. That may be families, voluntary associations, religious communities, educational institutions, small rooms, places where moral formation is taken seriously. That seems to me to be the civilizational question, not whether we have freedom, but whether we know what it is for. I'm not finished with After Virtue, but already it feels less like a critique of modernity and more like a question about the future. Can freedom be ordered without being imposed? Can virtue be recovered without authoritarian drift? Can pluralism coexist with thick moral formation? Can a society avoid both oppression and hollowness? I don't know yet how MacIntyre will answer these questions fully, but so far I find his diagnosis persuasive, not because it flatters my instincts, but because it clarifies something I've sensed for a long time. We don't lack moral passion. We lack shared moral structure, and if that is true, then the work ahead is not louder argument. It is deeper formation. I don't know yet whether I'll follow MacIntyre all the way, but I can already see the path he's clearing. The next part of the book moves from critique to reconstruction, and that's where things get serious. I'll keep going, and I'll let you know where it leads.